So I'm a system thinker. I like thinking in systems. It allows me to like have complex ideas about things. I believe in an holistic, like there's no isolated system in the world, right? Like, so I come from math and physics, and like the purism of like a system that is disconnected from everything else is non-existent in reality. So everything needs to be adapted into the feedback loops that are already in existence. So for instance, when recruitment is a great thing, right? Like you're recruiting, we just recruited like 4 interns. It's been an interesting experience because you also work with schools, right? Like, so schools change. Those people are going to school. The school year is going to look different than it looked last year. There's a lot of uncertainty about like location. That's obvious, right? Like, are they going to be in school physically or not? Some are not. That also gives you opportunity, right? Like, so those are the kind of this is the kind of thinking that I'm having. We can touch on it later on if you want. I can continue right now, but like it's a whole thinking, right? Like you can also have access to people you didn't have access before because they extend their Erasmus year, or like you can start like reaching out to interns that might be in different countries because you have the ability to support remote work. So like, okay, I can increase the pool of workers that I'm able to reach. It so there are always good, right, like and bad coming into different situations, and that the idea is to actually make a map of like all the things that are happening right now. And some of them are more challenging, such as how do you do onboarding? Like let's start with that. How does onboarding change? Because you have half of your engineers, you have a group of engineers. So what I'm noticing is that there's a group of people coming into the office. Um, and in need of physical reality with other people and social environment that is, you know, um, physical or more like in real life, IRL. And then there's a group of people that found their peace during this time that ask me on a continuous basis, can we stay like this? Can I stay at home and work like that? Um, which is actually beautiful to see because those people used to suffer in an office environment, especially in tech environment where most offices are open space, um, which we need to talk because I'm an advocate of build walls for your engineers. They need to focus. But like a lot of engineers really like jokes aside, a lot of engineers need a safe environment, a quiet environment in order to focus. And working from home, from their home office, allows them to do that. Some, especially with kids and like other dynamics, like shared apartments and stuff like that, say, no, I can't focus in my own. So everything changes, and you need to react to, oh, okay, now there's a new dynamic. So how do you work with the interns coming in? Are you attaching them to the engineers working at the facility? Is it safe? Wait, maybe it's not going to be safe in 2 weeks. Maybe uh, some regulation is going to change, and then you can't even open your office. Depends on whatever governments decide to do, um, and that's something that you need to calculate for. And be like, okay, let's keep this open, like this option open, and make sure that we are also able to onboard these interns uh, in any case, digitally, um, remotely. So I look at it as like, okay, are we able to support this thing digitally? And do we have processes that allows us to use the digital tools in order to coordinate? Or is this still a process that we don't have figured out yet? And it goes from the smallest thing to like, how do you do a retro with 20 people to, um, whatever. Stand-ups, planning. How do you get engagement from engineers where all of them is like in boxes, little boxes on the screen? And like you used to have them in the room, sticky notes, putting on a board, like active. So all of those things change. Everything changed. Everything, um, which is great because it also, for instance, for me, allows me to have one-on-ones, which used to be find a corner in the office or take them for a walk outside, because it's like you need to create trust in this environment, right? Like trust comes from discretion, first of all, right? Like from the ability of a person to control the parties of the conversation, which is important. It sounds weird to talk about these basics, but yeah, when you have a one-on-one, make sure that you have a private environment to have the one-on-one with your employee, because they need to feel safe when they talk to you, right? Like they need to feel safe that they know that the person in front of them is able to use this discretion with the information they provide you, right? Um, and it's much easier right now, much easier. Like I can set up a one-on-one, and I do more one-on-ones than I used to do before because of that. So like also your schedule changes. Um, but that's a great example of something that is much better. It's much easier to do right now, because it allows you to have a nice environment that is quiet and focused, and like very clear on, there's nobody interrupting, nobody
Yeah.
knocking on the door of your office. Can I get this meeting rooms, which used to be a pain, are now useless basically. um,
So yeah, I mean, I will definitely touch on some of those like team engagement stuff when we talk about how your role
yeah
has changed later on. But I really that I just wanted to touch on and ask for a little bit of clarity. So you said like you think about whether you have the, I guess, the digital requisites or the digital things you need in order to do this process, or if it is more of a manual thing right now. Like, what are some of the criteria for that, or how do you like if you come face to face with a particular challenge and you're trying to decide if you have the digital processes you need for that, like how do you decide whether it's, as you said, something like onboarding or whether it's I can't think of another example, but I think there's an interesting juxtaposition there, because on the one hand it's like some people work better in certain environments for a certain thing. So it could be if they need to, yeah, like prepare for a meeting, for example. Maybe that's better. They need like closed walls. They need like their own space, or it's they need to do a really big feature change and they need to work on that by themselves in a room. But if it's like an onboarding thing where you're introducing someone to a team, yes, ideally, I think a lot of people would say, if we can't bring them into the office, how are we gonna get them to meet everyone? Then we have to set up meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting in order for them to meet everyone, and then it's only on Zoom. It's not even in person, or you don't get to you don't get to. It doesn't feel as natural for someone to reach out to you for support if they need to say like, hey, can we jump on a Zoom call? If it's like in person, they can just sort of like catch you in the kitchen, or like run past you and be like, hey, I had a really quick question, I didn't want to disturb you. All of a sudden that responsibility falls on a new hire to have that initiative or that confidence now to actually like ping you on Slack or ask you to schedule a meeting with them in order to chat, which I think yeah, that's a very interesting dynamic. And I think what I liked about something you said as well is like, it's not at the moment, it's still very could change in the next 2 weeks kind of thing. It's not like, I don't think there's a hard and fast rule. It's not, everyone should be going into the office immediately or everyone should be going fully remote. It is still very dependent on like where you are as a company, what your people need. But I think I think that's what's going to last. That is my prediction, that people will be more adaptable to individual requirements.
yeah so like this has always been a dynamic environment, right? Like we just see, it's just like we pull the curtains, and so the world is a chaos. It's in chaos
Yeah, yeah.
continuously. Things happen all the time, and like part of our ab- ability as human beings to overcome these kind of things is our neuroplasticity, right? Like our ability to learn new skills and develop new methods, and be like, oh, okay, so we used to send fax to each other, and now we use emails, and unless you're a government website of some sort for some reason. But you know my like what I mean. Like adapting is something that we do as when we have common goals, when we have common values. So those remain the same, right? Like goals, values, those things will always be necessary if you want to have a group of people working together towards something, right? Like, so this is something very important to keep in mind, right? Like this didn't disappear, and it's also part of culture, right? Like if culture used to be drinks at the office, then if you can't have drinks at the office, what is left of culture? That is also a big, huge question that I know that we're working with on a continuous basis, thinking about like how to keep things safe while having people coming to the office, while creating an environment that is also supportive of the people that are do not feel comfortable coming to the office. And those are all new questions. I want to focus on what like are basics, like tools that you can actually use. So any meeting, right? Like let's talk about a meeting. I work with a lot of my um, engineers who want to go into engineering leaders, and this is a question I like to answer a lot. How do you run a meeting? There are not enough books written about that for some reason as well. Um, there's not a lot of podcasts about like how to run a meeting. I don't know why, but it's like a hugely important topic that is not being dealt with enough, I feel. Um, and it's very like some of it is very basic, some of it is like experience. When you come to a meeting in our environment, I believe that one of the first things you need to do is to prepare the meeting's agenda, right? I- Written down if possible, and share it with your colleagues. This is a blue sky scenario. A lot of the times you don't have the time, you just schedule something half an hour from now, so you're not going to prepare an agenda. Sometimes the agenda is unclear. Sometimes the mission of the goal of the meeting is unclear. That also can happen. But ideally, a facilitator of a meeting should prepare the people attending the meeting to what's coming. Same way that when we walk together about like talking, having this conversation, we have coordinated, right? Like beforehand, what is conversation um, will include, right? Like we will talk to each other. Um, and that is something that is like I encourage my the people I work with, my colleagues, to do a lot. Meaning, okay, do we want to bring up in this meeting? What is the goal of the next half an hour or hour? That doesn't change from reality to digitally or the virtual. But it became, I think, more crucial because it's harder right now to have I don't know 6 7 people in little boxes, and like figuring out why they're there, why are they there. Like it just became more clear because they're sitting quietly and not. It's easier to disappear as well, right? Like within a meeting. Um, so they will disappear if they don't want to engage. They will disappear. And if you have the bigger the meeting, the harder it is to actually make sure that everybody's engaged with it. Um, so you have to start with some kind of structure. You have to start you have to be able to facilitate for real. Like, thank you. This has been a constructive conversation, but we need to move on to the next topic. Let the action item, set the action item, like prepare, like, activity for running a meeting. Um, so prepare for your meetings and make sure that within it you um, bring some kind of a frameworking. There are billions of those, right? Like some kind of a framework to making this meeting effective. Whether is it the setting next actions or sending like meeting notes or you know whatever. There are other ways of doing it, but basically make sure that you have a preparation before the meeting and you have something coming out of it because it's harder. Like you're not sitting in a meeting room, right? Like you're not engaging with. There's a lot of communication is lost. So you have to have some kind of a framework to operate within it, right? Like we're not programmed to be able to do these things with so little information that we get from a screen, right?
Yeah.
Like
So tell me, like, how do you? Because I think the framework thing is interesting, and the one thought that comes to mind is like, okay, well, this kind of meeting structure sounds important, whether it's in person or remote. But as you said, when it is remote and when your teams are distributed, it's easier for people to disappear. It's also meetings become like Zoom meetings are. I think a lot of people can relate to this, or what I've heard anyways as well is they are just more tiring because you're sitting in front of a screen, and it's easier then to disengage as well. So, and I think it's in our team we have a no agenda, no attendance rule. So if you invite me to a meeting and there's no agenda, I have every right to say I'm not coming.
Yeah,
It's like I don't know if I need to be there. I don't know if it's important. I don't know what it's about. I can't prepare for it. So I'm going to spend my time on like something I can actually like drive forward. So I think that's a cool rule and ties into what you said of like the importance of having an agenda. But how do you like what kind of frameworks do you use, and how do you know which framework to use for what meeting? Like, do you have a sort of a rule of thumb for that?
yeah. So as I said, prepare like what is the preferred outcome of a meeting. If you need to make a decision, make sure that it's making a decision. If you need to um, have some tactical um, outcomes, such as like set of actions that you need to take, make sure that this is something you write down for yourself. I have a notebook in front of me all the time right now, which is becoming more and more useful um, because I can scribble things for myself that are happening right now in the conversation, things that used to be on the board, I guess, on the whiteboard. For me, I use my notebook and just putting things. Um, Make sure you like if you facilitate, make sure you rotate so you address people like directly. So you will have people that will hog the conversation, right? Like that are more I don't want to use the word extroverted because I don't believe in the binary definition there. We'll talk about that if you want, but um, there are people who are it's easier for them to have a conversation in a meeting. And there are people who are more quiet and need more time to think, and you need to bring them in. So what I do is I rotate and I make sure that like I do have at least a sentence from each of the people in the conversation. Otherwise, why are they there? That's another thing. Make them small, much smaller than you can. Touch base with somebody beforehand, especially if they're outside of the realm of your like if it's a team, you just had stand up and then you decided this needs a meeting.
Yep.
They all know what's going on. If you
Yep.
invite somebody from outside
Yep.
and they're like just like what am I doing here, which happens a lot, right? Like we can talk about the structure of our company, but it happens in every company. You need to give them some context. Context is necessary, right? Like, and I feel because it's a real part of my job, right? Like to give context to people all the time. Right? Like
Sure.
it's a like right one of the definitions of my role is to make sure that we are all living in a contextful, right? Like contextful environment. I think that would be yeah.
We'll use that word.
Okay, so
But and I think that's great because like if you're not giving someone context, you're actually not letting them do their best. Like you're making it really hard for them to contribute
yeah,
valuably. And then if you feel like they didn't contribute well, then the onus falls on you for not having given them the context beforehand. So I think that's a really good point. But just to pause there for a second, so I'd like to introduce a little bit about who you are and as well the company you work for, just to sort of, in the spirit of context, sort of set up where you are situated, which will maybe help as well understand where some of the things you're coming from are coming from, or some of the things you're saying are coming from. So so you work at a company called 3D Hubs. I was wondering if you could just very briefly start by telling me like what problem do you solve as a company with software?
we're digitizing manufacturing basically. We're connecting a global network of manufacturing partners to
Yeah.
a global network of um, customers that needs a physical engineering solution. So I want to prototype, I want to manufacture on a high volume. How do I go through this process, right? Like, so you could do that as part of a big company, right? Like, I used to, I don't know, I'm an Apple employee. is to work in, I don't know, building an iPhone, right? I want to design this iPhone beforehand and print it in some 3D printer, but now I don't have access to my 3D printer at work, right? Like, so how does that work? Um, but let's take a Kickstarter project or whatever, right? Like people who are dealing with manufacturing physical goods. There's a process of prototyping, then manufacturing in small volume, then manufacturing in a higher volume, hopefully. And that is something that we can provide along the way. So we are digitizing this entire process uh, from uploading your CAD files to ordering 20,000 pieces. Um, so that's what we do. It's a very, very interesting company. I joined the company because of that. I'm a maker myself. I feel like the industrial revolution that happened 200 years ago did not connect to the internet for some reason, and I'm very proud that I'm working in this company and try to solve exactly that. So yeah, like if you ask me about the thing the company does, very, very excited about the little details of what we do and how, the things you see our customers like. You can go. We have several videos on our social media and see like some of the cool customers that we're actually working with, and it's something that you feel on a regular basis, right? Like you see the like these people and you talk to them and you see their business grow, and some of them are just remarkable. Some of them are unbelievable, right? Like some of them are just like, wow, this is what you do. Yeah, that's I
Super.
think on the
Very
basic
good.
of like,
Very good elevator pitch.
yeah,
Nailed it.
okay. Yeah, because I really do like this company a lot, right? Like it's the topic that we solve is we do basically AWS for manufacturing, right? Like we do cloud service. We're putting manufacturing on cloud. That's huge.
That's really exciting.
Yeah.
Um, and so just for interest's sake, how big is your company at the moment? And are you all very distributed, or are you sort of all centered in one location?
So we are 150, around 150.
Mm-hmm.
We have two main offices, one in Europe, which is in Amsterdam. The other one is in Chicago, in the US. Um, Out of that, we have 25 software engineers that I work with.
Hmm.
I'm engineer manager within the software part, because we also have engineering as physical engineering and like mechanical engineering. And that's another topic that we deal with because you need to have the knowledge base. Um, the majority of development, and I think the mass of our employees are in Amsterdam. And we have pretty cool offices that we just moved into a year ago, just before the corona started. That are, yeah, like
Just sitting and waiting for people
sitting and
to
waiting for us.
occupy
No,
them.
no, they're like semi-occupied. Like as I said,
Cool, cool,
we have
cool.
yeah.
Okay.
So we have.
Nice.
I think that is the dynamic that you see already. That young
Yes.
people
Yeah.
are less worried about these things, so they're going more to the office, or they're going more outside. They're going to parties. It's okay.
Yeah.
But you have
Yeah.
young people.
So I mean that's immediately touching on something which is where this conversation is situated. But you joined as a I guess a senior engineering manager
Hmm.
in a remote world. So it wasn't a case of you having worked with this team for ages before in person, but it was a team that you joined remotely and then had to lead. And you've been in leadership positions before, but obviously this was a new team and then remote. And I think a lot of companies have had to adapt. It was like an adapt or die kind of scenario. But this idea of joining in the way you did during a pandemic, I think is quite like I don't think anyone could have prepared for that experience. And all of the stuff that we were talking about before this little introduction is testament to how teams and specifically as well how roles are changing and how people need to think about what am I trying to achieve with my team, or what are we trying to achieve as a team. So in the light of this idea of like roles changing and your role as engineering manager changed, could you just give me an idea of like how did you define what it was to be a technical manager before a remote world? Like, what were some of the responsibilities or characteristics that you would have used? And we'll sort of touch on how this have changed now. But just as an introduction, like, how would you have defined your role as technical manager or a manager?
So, okay, the way I see it is it's a people-oriented position to begin with. I'm an engineer, right? Like by profession, I coded my way through my career. Yet, when you're becoming a manager, your focus should be more on the people around you and empowering them. Right? Why? Because your role is to enable people, right? Like to make them okay. You can do 10 times better if I remove this block from you. That was always the role, and it will always be the role. At least from in my perspective, it will always be the role, right? People in the center. I have deep technical knowledge that I can bring in to understand what they're talking about. I have deep process knowledge that I know. I've seen the different types of Scrum and different types of processes, stakeholder management,
Yeah.
risk management, all of that. I bring them all together, but in the center there's the person, right? Like from recruiting, which is something that is in our domain, to onboarding, to ongoing career development, right? Like meaning, having a continuous kind of method to make sure these people are on track to where they want to be, or if they don't know where they want to be, then work with them to find out what are their goals, which is something as well that you can do. All of this has always been the role of an engineering manager, in my opinion. Now, when you translate it into practice, a lot of what you do is you take vision, right, like strategy in many cases, and translate it to more tactical form of behavior. Okay, so if we want to have, I don't know, this platform supporting 100 times the request it supports right now, okay, some very technical thing, then we need to have this amount of engineers and we need to have this many servers, and you need to connect in your brain those two things. Okay, if there are more servers, there are more engineers that need to maintain those servers, right? Like kind of very basic approach. But this all ties down back to like the people that drive it, right? Like they're the one who says, I know how this architecture look like. I'm working on a daily basis with this application or this database or this service or whatever. And then you need to go to provide them with the context, right? Like with the ongoing context of what's happening. That's on a day-to-day
Right.
basis, right? As an engineer. Okay, so this will take us where we want to go, because remember that we need to be there in 3 months or 2 months. What does it mean workload wise, right? Like, will you need to maintain this thing? So the valid question. Or will we need to get somebody to maintain this thing? Can you share this information with others? Um, can this knowledge be shared, right? Like an ownership be shared. So if not, you have single points of failure within your company, high pass factor. Um, all of these things are in the calculation of an engineer manager. It used to be the same before. Um, at least that's how I see the role. Um, and then when translating it into to being hired as an engineering manager remotely, um, because I said my values are the people are in the center. Um, for the first 3 months, I had a weekly one-on-ones with all of my engineers, all of the people that I work with on a daily basis, one-on-ones, and with people, even other people that are just like adjacent to the team, or um, working with the team on a continuous basis. I would have a like bi-weekly or weekly meeting with them, even though all the books will tell you have bi-weekly meeting. At one point, it took a hold of the majority of my schedule, right? Like it was just like this huge block of one-on-ones during the week, and I had only Fridays to, um, you know, do the rest of my job. But I feel like it gave me some context that I couldn't have otherwise, right? Like it's something that in this transformation was crucial. Like so, like when I'm talking about one-on-ones, I'm talking about 15 to, at one point I had 19 people that I had one-on-ones with on a weekly basis. It's challenging. Um, yes, Zoom conversations are hard because also you need to put in a lot of effort into figuring out what the person in front of you is feeling, thinking, doing at this moment. And there's no body language, there's no others, there's no, we are now, our brain is not used to this, right? Like we have sound, like we have a lot of senses gathering information at all time, like using only one and trying to get all this information out of this one is extremely excruciating task. Ask questions. Wait, are you right now really listening to me, or am I talking too long and I lost the point? Or it is it's valid question to make sure that we are still talking, and that makes, at least for me, it makes the conversation much less demanding. Right? Like always touching, it's artificial a bit, but also it works, right? Like, wait, are we still on the same page? Is it resonating with you? Do you understand what I'm saying? Is it something that makes sense? Like, yes, no, like always this kind of, and I've said with people during one-on-ones where we 25 minutes of quiet, bizarre, awkward silence.
I was actually about to ask on that. Like, how long do you have those one-on-ones for? Like, what have you found is a good time? And do you structure them?
Yeah, half an hour to an hour depends on. Some of them becomes, if you're working with and that's what I like to do to empower leadership,
Yeah.
right? Like so, if you're working with people who are becoming leaders, who are slowly forming into a leader position, you need to also talk with them about their group of people that they're trying to lead, right? Like you need to be able to coach them on how to go through this, or even just listen, right? Like just listen to, like, so they throw things at you, so like these things comes bounce back, right? Like sometimes we need to hear ourselves talk about something in order to figure out something, um and those can last longer than half an hour, which makes sense. Like, and when I have those, I prepare myself to have longer conversation if necessary. um
How do you prepare yourself to have longer conversations? Is there something you do, or is it more of a mental check?
Physically, like I have my environment. I will show you. I can show you my office, but I'll send you a picture if you want. It's very important to make a comfortable environment for yourself, right? Like, I'm talking really nuanced physical things right now. Make sure I stand up. I make sure that I walk and get water or coffee or whatever at least once an hour. So don't go, even if you have back to back, don't stay at your seat for 6 hours straight. That is not something that, like, people will tolerate you taking the computer with you, like turning off the camera for a second while you listen, so you can walk and get like some of your energy back, right? It's unhealthy to sit longer than an hour. that's just that's a rule.
Don't do it.
Yes, just don't do it, right? Like it's not something. It's you also decline in cognitive capacity after a while, so do not. I make sure I write down for myself the topics that, like, three topics at most that I want to bring up, and then I'm trying to stay dynamic with the conversation, right? Like, so when you talk to someone, like this person has a few things on their mind, so you would, if I see that there's something on the mind of the person in front of me, I immediately pull, right, like that into the main stage, right? Okay, let's talk about this. It seems like it bothers you.
Yeah. Yeah.
In that regard, I think what you do is similar, right? Like,
Yeah. Sure. So probably a similar technique. Yes.
yeah, yeah. So it's kind of the same technique, right? Like you want to listen to what that person has to tell you, not to what you think you need
Right.
to hear from this person. Like at least that's again how I see it. So I try to make sure that usually the hour ones are naturally hour ones, right? Like they're naturally reaching that point in time, and sometimes it's even longer. And I need to be like, okay, uh, go have your lunch. I need to have mine. I understand. Like, um, those are sometimes it's like an engaging conversation. So those are easy to have. The problem is an half an hour one that you need to stop in the middle if something crucial is happening, and then you need to be like, oh, I have back to back, but I really want to continue talking to you. So I make sure that within this conversation, I'm setting up, if we need more time, immediately set up a new meeting. And at work, so it's easy for me to work this way, but work with your calendar as if it's WhatsApp. Okay, it's like immediately, right? Like you, the same way you text. This is how I work with my calendar. Okay, let's move this, let's do this, let's do that. Send a quick message. It's a key tool right now. It's a key tool, right? Like it's you can't do without it.
That is a lesson I had to learn really hard, because I used to be the kind of person who, if I scheduled something and someone was like, "Can we chat at 10?" I'm like, "Oh, I have a thing there already." But it's
Yeah,
like, I put it there. Like, I can move it. It's not that hard. Like, it's not, your calendar is not this piece of concrete that is now hardened and you can't move it. So I think that's a really cool way of thinking about it. Just being treating your calendar a bit less with a bit less like fixation, because otherwise you're going to work for your calendar as opposed to the
yeah.
other way around.
You're forming these walls, right? Like you even have
Yeah.
it. It looks like a wall in the most
Yeah.
calendar.
Oh my god.
It looks like a wall of bricks that you look at in the beginning of the week, and you're like, ah,
Yeah.
okay, my
I
God.
try make mine colorful. I try use different colors
Yeah,
on my Google Calendar just to
okay,
make it a bit more bearable, but it's still a wall.
yeah, it's a wall.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
So what I mean, you've spoken about like one-on-ones and meetings, and we've touched on a little bit the like recruitment side, which I think we could even dive into a little bit more deeper. But what are some of the other parts of your role which you felt have been a particular challenge, or something that you've had to work on in particular? I know you're talking a lot about it being almost a people problem, actually, like when remote, like your the aspects of your work around the product or the vision or the strategy maybe haven't changed that much, but in terms of, and even with the people thing, so the goals are still the same, but the way you do that has maybe had to change. So you still want to you still want to put your people first, but one-on-ones now have to be like, you have to be very careful about how long they are, and like how you structure them and how you read someone. So I guess yeah, so what I'm trying to say is like your goals are maybe the same, but the means to which you achieve them have maybe changed slightly. So are there other things that we haven't spoken about yet, just in terms of your role as a manager?
processes. Like processes are the hardest thing to set up anyway. So when you come into a team, right? Like you say, you can be like, oh yeah, I've been here for 1 month, and I'm gonna change everything we did, right? Like you can do that. We've all been there, I think. Um, but then you can also come and be like, oh, all your processes are holy. I'm not gonna touch them. So those are the two ends of how you can operate. Um, Obviously anecdotal, so not it's not something really useful to have those
Yes,
boundaries.
for sure. Yeah.
The way I see it again is, and the company sees the same thing, is like it's part of our company values is to create processes that we benefit from, and not processes that are we need to serve, right? Like sometimes there's some kind of misconception about certain processes. No, but you have to do it this way. You're like, but why? And then the why disappears, and then you're only left with the process, and becomes this untouchable thing. And so you need to be very careful with processes, especially right now because they can shift, right?
Right.
Um,
Do you have an example of a process you
oh, like
had to work through or
on
work
call,
around?
like let's say incident management, right? Like a company like ours, it's crucial that we start having incident management, um, because we become, right, like much more global. We become like, we need to have our platform working in all times. So if you work in one time zone, it's different than if you work in all time zones. Um, so you need to have some kind of incident management, and I've been working on that for a while, because it's also touchy about, like, okay, somebody needs to be on call, somebody needs to dedicate their time for it after hours, somebody needs to be able to respond to a situation at 2 a.m. So it impacts, right, the work-life balance. It's a sensitive topic. You need to be sensitive. And it's technical because things can crash from a variety of reasons, right? Like, and it's can be cumbersome, right? Like, it can be like, if you want to report a bug, you need to go through this process, and then by the time you get the bug to the engineer, it's been 2 hours of downtime, right? Like, so also you don't want to go there. So all of these are being calculated into like one of these protocols that you need to work on. How do you do this? What happens if X happens? What happens if Y happens? What happens if you're unavailable, or somebody, like, I don't know, didn't answer the phone or didn't wake up? Like, do we have a backup of some sort? Um, Etc. Right? Like, it's a deep thing, incident management. Um, I think it's a classic example of a process that everybody is a bit like, how we're gonna approach it. It's again an interesting topic, and it's been challenging for me as well, right? Like, I've done it only once or twice before, right? Like, this is my third time, and I'm not, right. Like, this is something I'm still working on, right? Like, what is the right way of doing it? So that's an example, right, of something of a process that I'm still struggling with, especially during this time. Should we have, in different places, you have like a dedicated phone, right? Like, and stuff like that. Maybe we can rotate with a digital tool that doesn't, like, just uses people's phone numbers. Do we need to get to this point even that the number is like that? Can we just, do something with our platform so it's more resilient? Um, Maybe there are rules that we need to put in. No pushing code after this hour. But why? What does it mean? It means that we can't push code after that hour. That's a basically an anti-pattern, right? Um,
Why is that particularly difficult? Why is that changed, or why has that been a challenge in this particular environment?
um, it's again, it's always a change, but it touches people's um, work-life balance. I think that's the major thing there. Right? Like, you're asking people to be attentive to production after hours, so you need to make sure that it's a breeding ground for conflicts. I feel like, for nonsense conflicts as well. Like, somebody thought there was a bug, but they didn't know, and then so they went to customer success, and then somebody was woken up in at 2 a.m. for no reason, or this person did not know about a real bug going on, or, like, you can have so many different things popping up. It's very hard to control, like, this kind of thing, and it touches people's life, right? Like, I want to go to dinner with my wife. I want to, right, like, to have like 2 glasses of wine. I don't want to code this Friday. I don't want to, restart the service. So I'm trying to. Maybe it's me because I'm so sensitive to this thing, but like, I'm trying to keep it as sensitive as possible, and try to make sure that um, things are done in a, pragmatic, like, in a real pragmatic, cemented way, that, like, like that, at least the core of it is clear, right? Like, what is a P0 priority bug? That seems silly, but you need to define that. Um, so like, that's challenging because if you don't have it set up before, then it's hard to set it up right now. You need to adjust everything to a digital reality, right? Like, to a only working from home environment. Um, but it's not really working from home, right? Like, it's working remotely. So some people have bad internet connections where they go or travel. Um, it's another thing to think about. Can they do? So all of these things are tied in together in a very crucial point, right? Like you're at one point, if you want to have business with bigger and bigger customers, you will need to be due diligent, right? Like you need to go through diligence, you need to show like uptime, you need to show ability to support the time. So when I use AWS, for instance, as a service, they have an SLA. Like we signed a contract basically with each other. So if they don't keep a 99.999 uptime during the year, like they need to give me some discount, or right, like, and it happens. You need to be able, like, maybe that doesn't matter for my personal website, but it does matter when Netflix is experiencing downtime with Amazon, right? um it's a crucial, like in my opinion, it's a crucial thing, right? Like keeping your production like up is a sign of maturity for a company. So
Cool. So as a sort of last or closing point, what is your, so we've like on the recruitment thing, I think the like being able to uh recruit, whether it's an intern or a full-time employee remotely, I think this point has come up a lot, so I'm curious to hear what you think. But on the one hand, the pool of talent that you can tap into is a lot bigger. You can now sort of, from another country, from another continent even, you can find someone that's perfect for your role, or someone who you think will really add value to your team. In the same breath, though, they now have any company essentially that they want to work for at their fingertips. So on the one hand, it almost feels like as well you have a lot more competition, or you have to sell yourself even harder. How do you think about that? And is there a way that you're thinking about it, or even are you open to it as a manager or as a company in terms of hiring people that are in different countries as full-time remote employees?
it's a conversation going on. um how will the future look like? I don't think we change our policy yet. So we are hiring engineers to work with the same engineering team that we have here in Amsterdam. And it's a question. We talk about it often, like not only for new employees, but also for people who are already working with us and need to go back, right? Um, I think we're gonna see a shift in global dynamics of this sort. It's already something that started like in the past few years. You have people who are advocating for remote working. Um, there's entire Twitter feed, right? Like the Twitter feed. You have companies that have been doing remote for quite a while. Like we have one here in GitLab, right? Like that they're doing some fully remote for the past, I think, few years, 3 years or something like that. We are talking about it. We are discussing like internally how should we approach it. Um, Again, it has a cost, right? Like in the end, we are also a very like we invest a lot in culture, right? Like in company culture, and like it's challenging to have company activities that are not physical, um, right now, at least. We do what that's why I said we have amazing offices. Like they have many shared areas where you can engage with your colleagues. It's something of our nature, right? To have this cultural um, bonding, right? And working remotely is still a challenge in that regard. Um, but we are, right, like thinking about opening it up and thinking about it and we have some experiment with the interns coming in and seeing how. So that's good, right? We have interns. Yeah, that's how we see it. We see it like we
Yeah.
want to adjust ourselves to what's
And I
coming.
think so. What's some of the stuff you're
For
talking
now,
about as
yeah.
well? It's more about being okay with things changing in the next few months, but treating this as a permanent thing for the time being, so that you can actually work through your current processes and make sure that they work for you right now. And I think by adapting what they are now, you'll be able to adapt them again in a couple months' time if things change dramatically. But holding on to things really tightly, I think, is where people are going to struggle the most if they aren't flexible.
Yeah,
So I think yeah.
there is no normal. there is no normal to go back to. It's never been. It's always like
Yeah.
an ongoing
Um,
dynamic system. There is no
Yeah.
normal.
So
I
I
think
think
that's, yeah.
I could literally talk to you for another 3 hours about this. I think there is so much
Me
there is
too, and
a lot
we,
that we could touch
yeah.
on, but thanks so much for sharing your insights. I will definitely have you on again to continue this conversation. But for the time being, thank you, Amos. It was a pleasure chatting to you.
Thank you too. It was really a pleasure, and the entire process up until now very well planned and very well executed. So I'm up for it. If you want to have another hour, I'm up
Cool.
for it.
Sounds
Thank you.
great.